The day the sacred stag vanished, the kingdom stopped fearing the darkness beyond the forest and began fearing the secrets hidden within its own walls. Dawn arrived over the kingdom of Ashmoor wrapped in silver mist, yet the ancient bells that welcomed every harvest moon festival never rang. Instead, a silence unlike any the people had ever known settled over the towering pines, swallowing birdsong, muffling footsteps, and leaving every heart uneasy without anyone understanding why. Evelyn Carter felt at the moment she stepped beneath the first cedar arch leading into the royal sanctuary. For as long as she could remember, the forest had greeted her with whispers carried through trembling leaves and the gentle rustle of unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. This morning, there was nothing. Even the wind seemed unwilling to disturb the stillness. She tightened her faded green cloak around her shoulders and continued along the narrow trail, her worn leather boots sinking slightly into damp earth still glistening with dew. Every harvest moon began the same way. Before nobles filled the castle courtyard, and before the Alpha King offered his blessing to the gathered packs, the sacred stag always emerged from the heart of Elderwood Forest. Its gleaming white coat reflected the sunrise like fresh snow, while its magnificent antlers shimmered with pale gold that seemed woven from moonlight itself. The people believed the creature's appearance confirmed the kingdom remained under nature's protection for another year. But today, the clearing stood empty. At first, Evelyn thought she had simply arrived too early. She waited beside the crystal spring where the stag always paused to drink. Minutes slipped by, then more. The water remained perfectly smooth, untouched by careful hooves. Her pulse quickened. Something was terribly wrong. Kneeling beside the spring, she noticed an unfamiliar mark pressed into the soft mud. It wasn't the elegant print of a deer, nor the broad track of a wolf. It looked almost as though the earth itself had been disturbed by something heavy dragged across the ground. Nearby, broken fern stems leaned in unnatural directions, and tiny flecks of shimmering silver clung to a low branch. Evelyn carefully brushed one against her fingertips. It wasn't paint. It wasn't frost. It glowed for only a heartbeat before fading into dust. A chill traveled slowly down her spine. She had spent nearly every day of the past 12 years caring for this sanctuary. She knew every trail, every stream, every ancient oak whose roots reached deeper than memory. Nothing here happened without reason. Behind her, distant horns echoed from the castle. The ceremony was beginning. The sacred stag had never missed the harvest moon, not once in hundreds of recorded years. Soon the kingdom would notice. Soon fear would spread faster than wildfire. Evelyn looked once more toward the dense forest beyond the clearing, where towering trees stood like silent guardians hiding truths no one else could see. Somewhere beyond those shadows, she could feel it. Not danger, not death, a secret waiting to be found. And although she could not explain why, every instinct within her whispered the same impossible thought. The sacred stag had not disappeared. It had left because it was trying to protect someone. The first whispers reached the castle long before Evelyn did. By the time she crossed the stone bridge leading toward the royal courtyard, frightened voices had already become anxious rumors, and anxious rumors had begun hardening into certainty. The sacred stag had abandoned Ashmoor. Servants hurried through marble corridors carrying baskets they had forgotten to fill. Guards stood unusually still at their posts, their eyes fixed on the forest instead of the people entering the palace gates. Even the banners hanging from the high towers seemed strangely lifeless without the morning breeze. Evelyn kept walking despite the knot tightening inside her chest. She still carried the tiny silver dust hidden inside the fold of her glove, uncertain whether anyone else had seen it before it disappeared. Every instinct urged her to return to the sanctuary immediately, yet another voice inside warned that if she remained silent, someone else would shape the story first. She was only halfway across the courtyard when the royal horns suddenly fell silent. Hundreds of visitors turned toward the grand staircase as King Lucian Blackwood emerged beside the High Council. He carried himself with the calm confidence expected of every Alpha King, but something felt different. His usual steady stride seemed measured, almost careful, as though an invisible weight rested across his shoulders. His silver eyes swept over the gathered crowd before briefly drifting toward the distant forest. For only an instant, Evelyn thought she saw concern hidden behind his composed expression. Then it vanished beneath the practiced dignity of a ruler. Elder Magnus stepped forward, his ceremonial robes trailing across the polished stone. His voice echoed across the courtyard with deliberate strength. The sacred stag has not appeared. A collective breath caught among the crowd. No one moved. No one dared interrupt. Until the guardian returns, today's blessing cannot be completed. Murmurs spread through the assembly like ripples across still water. Some lowered their heads in prayer. Others exchanged fearful glances. Children instinctively reached for their parents' hands. Ashmoor had always believed the kingdom and its king shared a sacred bond with the forest. If one weakened, so did the other. Then another voice rose above the growing unrest. Someone disturbed the sanctuary. The words came from Lord Cedric Ashbourne, one of the royal advisors. His sharp gaze traveled across the crowd before stopping directly on Evelyn. Our forest keeper was the last person permitted inside. Dozens of eyes followed his stare. Evelyn suddenly felt the weight of every whispered judgment pressing against her. She stepped forward, forcing herself to remain calm. The sanctuary was already silent when I arrived. I found unusual tracks and signs that something had happened. Lord Cedric's expression remained perfectly composed. Convenient. Several nobles quietly nodded. Others looked away, unwilling to meet Evelyn's eyes. She recognized that look. It was the same silent doubt she had lived with her entire life as an Omega whose gifts belonged more to the forest than to the court. King Lucian raised one hand, and the courtyard became still. Once again, his voice remained calm, neither accusing nor comforting. Until the truth is known, no conclusions will be made. Relief briefly touched Evelyn's heart. Yet before it could settle, Lord Cedric spoke again with measured confidence. Then allow us to begin with the only witness. The crowd slowly parted around her, not out of respect, but distance. Standing alone beneath the morning sky, Evelyn realized the silence surrounding the vanished guardian had begun changing into something far more dangerous. Someone wanted the kingdom searching for the wrong answer, and somehow she had become the easiest person to blame. By sunset, the whispers had become verdicts. No decree had been signed. No evidence had been presented, yet the servants who once greeted Evelyn with warm smiles quietly stepped aside as she passed through the castle corridors. Conversations ended the moment she approached. Children who used to wave from the kitchen gardens now stayed close to their parents, glancing at her with uncertain eyes. Fear always searched for the simplest answer, and today she had become that answer. Evelyn left the castle before dusk settled completely over Ashmoor. She ignored the heavy gaze of the guards watching from the front gate and followed the familiar trail back toward Elderwood Forest. If the truth still existed anywhere, it would be waiting beneath the ancient trees. The deeper she walked, the more the forest seemed to awaken in strange ways. Branches swayed although no wind touched them. Tiny white flowers that normally opened only beneath moonlight had already begun blooming across the forest floor. Somewhere in the distance an owl called once before falling strangely silent. It felt less like entering the woods and more like crossing into a place holding its breath. She returned to the crystal spring where everything had begun that morning. Kneeling beside the water, she searched every inch of the muddy ground once again. Most of the strange marks had already faded beneath the passing hours, but one remained. It curved sharply around a weathered stone instead of crossing directly over it, as though whoever left the trail had deliberately avoided. Disturbing the rock, Evelyn brushed away damp leaves until unfamiliar symbols appeared across its surface. They were old, far older than the kingdom itself, carved so deeply that even centuries of rain had failed to erase them. She traced the first symbol with careful fingers. The stone felt unexpectedly warm. Suddenly, the silver dust hidden inside her glove shimmered once more. Tiny glowing particles drifted from the fabric and settled gently across the ancient carving. For a single heartbeat, the symbols lit with pale blue light before fading again. Evelyn stared in disbelief. She had not imagined the silver dust. It was reacting to something buried beneath the forest itself. Her heart pounded faster as another detail caught her attention. Beyond the stone, several broken branches pointed toward the northern ridge, a place forbidden to nearly everyone in Ashmoor. Few traveled there because the old stories claimed the deepest part of Elderwood remembered every promise ever broken. Most dismissed those tales as legends meant to frighten children. Today they no longer felt like stories. As she stepped toward the narrow path leading uphill, a familiar voice echoed behind her. "You should stop before someone sees you." Evelyn turned to find Martha Ellis, the elderly herbalist who had taught her to recognize healing plants as a child. The old woman rarely left her woodland cottage after sunset, yet now she stood beneath the towering pines with worry filling her gentle gray eyes. "They are searching the forest," Martha whispered. "Not for the guardian. For proof against you." Evelyn lowered her voice. "I found something. Someone wanted the trail to disappear, but they missed this stone." Martha's expression changed the moment she noticed the faded symbols. The color quietly drained from her face. She stepped backward instead of closer. "No," she breathed. "Those marks should not exist anymore." Evelyn frowned. "You know what they are?" Martha hesitated for several long seconds before answering. "They are older than the throne, older than the first Alpha King. If they have awakened again, then this has never been about a missing guardian." Before Evelyn could ask another question, a distant hunting horn echoed across the hills. It was closer than before. Someone was entering the forest, and judging by the growing number of voices carried through the trees, they were coming directly toward the hidden path Martha had desperately hoped no one would ever find. The hunting horns echoed again, closer this time, followed by the distant rhythm of boots pressing against fallen leaves. Martha Ellis instinctively stepped away from the hidden stone, her hands trembling as she gathered her weathered shawl around her shoulders. "You must leave now," she whispered. "If they find you here, they will never listen to another word you say." Evelyn glanced toward the narrowing trail where the sounds continued to grow louder. Every sensible thought urged her to return to the castle and defend herself, but something stronger pulled her toward the forbidden ridge. The strange symbols, the glowing silver dust, the silence that had swallowed the forest, none of it felt random anymore. Someone had carefully arranged every piece long before the sacred stag disappeared. Without another word, Martha pointed toward an overgrown path almost completely hidden beneath thick ivy. "Go there. Very few remember it exists. Follow it until the trees begin changing." Evelyn hesitated only long enough to thank the elderly healer before disappearing between the tangled branches. Within moments, the voices behind her faded beneath the quiet heartbeat of the ancient woods. The path grew steeper with every step. Familiar oak trees slowly gave way to towering white pines unlike any she had ever seen. Their trunks shimmered softly beneath the fading afternoon light, while tiny silver leaves drifted through the air despite the complete absence of wind. It felt as though she had crossed an invisible border, separating the ordinary forest from something much older. The deeper she walked, the stranger the world became. Moss-covered enormous stones carved with faded circles and stars. Crystal-clear streams crossed the trail without making a sound. Even the air smelled different, carrying the fresh scent of rain, although the sky above remained perfectly clear. Then she saw it. A single strand of brilliant white hair rested upon a low branch ahead. It was far too long to belong to any ordinary deer, and it glowed faintly whenever sunlight touched its surface. Evelyn carefully lifted it into her palm. The moment she did, a warm pulse spread through her fingertips. Somewhere ahead, a soft chime echoed through the trees, almost like distant glass bells carried on invisible currents. She followed the sound until the forest suddenly opened into a secluded valley hidden behind towering cliffs. Her breath caught. Wildflowers stretched across the meadow in waves of white and pale blue. A quiet pond reflected the evening sky with impossible clarity. Standing beside the water was the sacred stag. It was alive. Its magnificent coat shone brighter than moonlight, and its golden antlers reached toward the heavens like living branches. Yet something had changed. Instead of stepping proudly into the open as it always had during the harvest festival, the guardian remained completely still, watching the surrounding forest with calm, watchful eyes. It was not hiding out of fear. It was standing guard. Evelyn took one cautious step forward. The sacred stag turned its head toward her without alarm. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then the guardian slowly lowered its head, not in surrender, but as though acknowledging someone it had expected all along. A gentle breeze finally stirred through the valley, carrying silver leaves across the pond. As they drifted over the water, the perfect reflection began to shift. The peaceful image of flowers disappeared, replaced by the faint outline of a towering stone temple hidden beneath tangled roots and ancient vines somewhere beyond the valley. Evelyn stared at the impossible vision until it slowly faded back into calm water. Her heart raced with sudden understanding. The Sacred Stag had never abandoned Ashmoor. It had led her here. Before she could gather another thought, the Guardian lifted its head toward the distant mountains, and from somewhere beyond the hidden temple came the deep, mournful sound of a bell that had not rung for generations. The ancient bell echoed a second time, its deep voice, rolling across the hidden valley until even the still water trembled with gentle ripples. The Sacred Stag turned without hesitation and began walking toward the northern cliffs. It never looked back, yet somehow Evelyn understood she was being invited to follow. Every step carried her farther from the world she had known and deeper into a place untouched by ordinary time. Thick vines parted naturally as the Guardian passed, revealing a narrow stone passage concealed behind layers of moss. Beyond it stood the forgotten temple she had seen reflected upon the pond. Massive white columns stretched toward a ceiling woven from the roots of ancient trees, while shafts of fading sunlight poured through narrow openings above, painting the stone floor with ribbons of gold. Although countless years had passed, not a single carving had crumbled. The temple felt less abandoned than patiently waiting. The Sacred Stag stopped before an enormous circular wall covered with intricate reliefs. It gently lowered one antler until its glowing tip brushed the center of the ancient stone. Soft blue light spread outward like water across glass, awakening symbols that had slept for centuries. One by one the carvings came alive. Evelyn stepped closer, hardly daring to breathe. The first images showed the earliest Alpha Kings standing beside the Sacred Stag beneath the same moon. The Guardian was never shown as a servant or a pet. It stood beside each ruler as an equal, its light intertwining with theirs until both figures glowed as one. The next carvings revealed something no story in Ashmoor had ever mentioned. A thread of silver light connected the heart of every crowned Alpha King to the heart of the Sacred Stag. When the Guardian grew brighter, the king stood stronger. When the light around the Guardian dimmed, the king's strength faded with it. Evelyn's eyes widened as the final carvings awakened. They showed shadowed figures gathering beneath the temple, not creatures from the forest, but people wearing the ceremonial robes of the royal court. One figure reached toward the silver thread connecting king and guardian, attempting to sever it through an ancient ritual hidden from the rest of the kingdom. The Sacred Stag fled into the deepest forest, not to abandon Ashmoor, but to keep the sacred bond beyond the reach of those who sought to control it. A quiet gasp escaped Evelyn. Every accusation against her suddenly felt painfully insignificant beside the truth unfolding before her eyes. This had never been about the disappearance of the Guardian. Someone wanted the kingdom to believe the Sacred Stag had abandoned them while secretly weakening the Alpha King. Her thoughts immediately returned to King Lucian, his measured steps during the ceremony, the unusual exhaustion hidden behind his calm expression, the brief moment of concern she had noticed before anyone else. The connection had already begun to weaken. The temple floor vibrated softly beneath her boots. More symbols illuminated along the walls, forming a final message written in the ancient language Martha had recognized upon the hidden stone. Although Evelyn had never studied the forgotten script, the glowing words settled into her mind with startling clarity, as though the temple itself wished to be understood. Only the one who follows truth, without seeking power, may restore what others attempt to divide. Tears gathered in her eyes, not from fear, but from the overwhelming weight of responsibility settling upon her heart. The Sacred Stag slowly approached and lowered its magnificent head until one glowing antler rested only inches from her hand. The silver dust still hidden inside her glove rose once again, circling gently around both of them before drifting toward the northern wall. There, another hidden passage quietly opened, revealing a descending staircase bathed in pale light. Somewhere below, a single human voice echoed through the ancient chambers, calm, confident, and completely unaware that the temple had just revealed its greatest secret to the one person it had never expected to find. The voice drifting upward from the hidden passage was smooth, measured, and strangely familiar. Evelyn instinctively stepped behind one of the enormous stone columns as the Sacred Stag remained perfectly still beside the glowing wall, almost as if it already knew who was approaching. Holding her breath, she carefully descended several worn steps until the lower chamber came into view. The room beneath the temple was smaller than the sanctuary above, yet every inch of its circular walls was covered with ancient symbols surrounding a single stone altar. Standing before it with one hand resting calmly upon the carved surface was Lord Cedric Ashbourne. Gone was the reassuring expression he wore before the royal court. His face now carried quiet satisfaction, the look of someone whose plans were unfolding exactly as expected. "The bond weakens exactly as the records promised," he said softly to himself. "Another sunrise and the Alpha King will lose the final trace of the forest's blessing. Then the council will beg for new leadership." Evelyn's heart pounded against her ribs. She had suspected someone inside the court, but hearing the truth spoken aloud felt entirely different. Cedric slowly unrolled an aged parchment across the altar. Unlike the glowing carvings above, the symbols upon the scroll appeared faded and incomplete. "You chose loyalty over wisdom," he continued, speaking as though addressing someone standing beside him. "You protected the wrong bloodline for centuries." The Sacred Stag quietly stepped into the chamber. Instead of retreating, it faced Cedric with calm dignity, its silver eyes reflecting neither fear nor anger. Cedric smiled without surprise. "There you are. I wondered how much longer you would hide." He lifted a small crystal pendant hanging beneath his cloak. A faint gray light shimmered within it, pulsing in slow rhythm with the glowing thread Evelyn had seen carved upon the temple wall. Although she did not fully understand its purpose, she immediately recognized the pendant as part of whatever ritual had begun severing the ancient connection between the Guardian and King Lucian. Cedric took one slow step toward the Sacred Stag. Imagine what Ashmoor could become without old promises deciding who deserves the throne. Strength should belong to those willing to seize it, not those chosen by legends. The Guardian remained motionless. Its golden antlers glowed a little brighter, filling the chamber with gentle light that softened every shadow. Cedric narrowed his eyes, but did not advance another step. "You cannot stop what has already begun." Evelyn noticed something else then. The altar itself was responding. Hairline cracks of silver light spread across its surface before flowing quietly toward the staircase where she stood hidden. The same warm sensation she had felt near the ancient carvings returned to her hands. Looking down, she realized the tiny silver dust remaining inside her glove had begun glowing once more, brighter than ever before. It drifted into the air without her touching it, forming delicate ribbons that floated toward the altar. Cedric's confident expression changed instantly. He turned sharply, searching the chamber. Who was there? Evelyn pressed herself against the stone column, hardly daring to breathe. For several long moments, only silence answered him. Then the Sacred Stag gently struck one hoof against the temple floor. The sound echoed through every chamber above and below, awakening dozens of glowing symbols hidden within the walls. Light flooded the room like the first rays of dawn. Cedric shielded his eyes for only a moment, but it was enough. The silver ribbons abandoned the altar and drifted directly toward Evelyn, circling around her hands before rising above her head like tiny stars. The temple had made its choice, and for the first time since this impossible journey began, someone besides the Sacred Stag knew she was no longer merely following the truth. She had become part of it. The chamber continued glowing long after the silver ribbons settled around Evelyn, bathing the ancient temple in a quiet light that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Lord Cedric Ashbourne stared at her with undisguised disbelief before his expression slowly returned to calm calculation. "So the temple has chosen its witness," he said softly. "That is inconvenient, but not impossible to overcome." Evelyn stepped from behind the stone column, no longer willing to hide. The Sacred Stag remained beside her, its luminous coat filling the chamber with gentle radiance. "You lied to the kingdom," she said, her voice steadier than she expected. "The Guardian never abandoned Ashmoor. You tried to separate it from the Alpha King." Cedric smiled faintly, almost sympathetically. Truth is rarely as useful as fear. Fear convinces people to surrender their hope. Hope asks difficult questions. He slowly closed the ancient scroll and slipped it beneath his cloak. By tomorrow, the council will believe King Lucian can no longer protect the realm. They will ask for stability. They will ask for certainty. And they will accept the only answer placed before them. Evelyn looked toward the glowing altar where the silver light continued flowing beneath the stone floor like hidden streams. The bond is still alive, she replied. The temple would not have awakened if it were already broken. For the first time, Cedric's confidence faltered. He glanced toward the sacred stag, whose golden antlers shone even brighter than before. Not broken, he admitted quietly, only weakened. At that very moment, the pendant hanging around his neck flickered unevenly, its gray light dimming beneath the growing brilliance surrounding the guardian. Tiny cracks appeared across the crystal surface. Cedric instinctively covered it with one hand, his calm expression giving way to concern. The temple itself was resisting him. The sacred stag stepped toward the altar and gently lowered its head. A wave of warm light spread through the chamber, flowing across every carved symbol before rushing upward through the hidden passage toward the world above. Evelyn felt the same warmth pass through her hands and into her heart. Images flashed briefly across her mind. King Lucian standing alone inside the royal observatory, one hand resting against the stone wall as though fighting sudden exhaustion. The High Council quietly debating who should assume temporary authority if the king's strength continued to fade. Servants whispering that the harvest blessing had already failed. Every moment they remained hidden allowed Cedric's carefully planted doubts to grow stronger. Evelyn opened her eyes with sudden certainty. "We have to return to the castle." Cedric heard the determination in her voice and slowly stepped backward toward a narrow corridor leading deeper beneath. "The temple. You may reveal the guardian," he said calmly. "You may even tell them everything you believe you have learned. But people rarely abandon the story they accepted first. They will trust the council before they trust an Omega accused of bringing disaster." With that, he disappeared into the shadows beyond the ancient passage before Evelyn could follow. She took one instinctive step after him, but the sacred stag gently blocked her path. Its silver eyes remained fixed upon her with quiet understanding. Then it turned toward the temple in trance instead. Evelyn finally understood. Chasing Cedric would only delay the truth. Saving the bond between the Guardian and the Alpha King mattered far more than capturing the man responsible. As they emerged from the hidden sanctuary, the last light of evening stretched across the valley, and far beyond the distant cliffs the royal castle stood silhouetted against a crimson sky. Above its highest tower, a single white falcon suddenly circled 3 times before flying toward the forest, as though carrying an urgent message that time was running out. The castle gates came into view just as the first stars appeared above Ashmoor, but nothing about the royal courtyard resembled the peaceful kingdom Evelyn had left only hours before. Hundreds of citizens had gathered with worried faces, waiting beneath rows of flickering lanterns while members of the High Council stood upon the grand staircase, speaking in quiet, urgent voices. Every conversation stopped the instant Evelyn stepped through the open gate. Then another silence swept across the crowd as the sacred stag emerged beside her. Its radiant white coat reflected the lantern light like fresh snow beneath a full moon, and its magnificent golden antlers illuminated the courtyard with a gentle glow no one had witnessed outside the harvest blessing in generations. Gasps echoed from every corner of the square. Several people instinctively lowered their heads. Others fell to one knee without being asked. Children stared in open wonder, while elderly villagers wiped tears from their eyes. The Guardian had never abandoned them. It had returned on its own. At the top of the staircase, King Lucian Blackwood slowly rose from his chair. Although exhaustion still lingered in his face, his silver eyes brightened the moment they met the Guardians. The sacred stag calmly walked forward until only a few feet separated them. As it lowered its head, a ribbon of silver light stretched once again between its heart and the king's, becoming visible for everyone standing in the courtyard. A collective murmur swept through the crowd. The ancient bond described only in forgotten legends was real. Evelyn stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "The Guardian did not leave the kingdom," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "It withdrew because someone within the royal court tried to break the sacred bond protecting both Ashmoor and its king." Every eye turned toward the High Council. Lord Cedric Ashbourne remained remarkably composed, offering a patient smile as though preparing to dismiss another impossible accusation. "An extraordinary story," he replied calmly. "But stories are not evidence." Before Evelyn could answer, the sacred stag gently struck one hoof upon the stone courtyard. The sound rang through the palace grounds like the ancient bell beneath the temple. Instantly, the silver light surrounding its antlers expanded across the polished stone, revealing glowing symbols identical to those hidden within the forgotten sanctuary. The markings spread until they reached the feet of every council member before stopping directly beneath Lord Cedric. At the same moment, the crystal pendant concealed beneath his ceremonial robe began glowing through the fabric. Several council elders noticed it immediately. Cedric instinctively reached for the pendant, but the movement only drew more attention. One elder stepped forward with visible confusion. "What are you hiding?" Cedric remained silent. Tiny cracks suddenly appeared across the crystal beneath his robe before it slipped free from its chain and fell onto the stone steps. The gray light trapped inside shattered into drifting dust that disappeared beneath the brighter silver glow surrounding the sacred stag. A quiet understanding settled across the courtyard. No dramatic confession was needed. The temple had answered with truth that everyone could see. King Lucian descended the staircase one measured step at a time until he stood beside Evelyn. His strength seemed to return with every step as the silver thread connecting him to the guardian shone brighter than before. Looking out across his people, he spoke with calm authority. "Fear divided us because we trusted suspicion before truth. Tonight the forest itself has reminded us where wisdom begins." Then he turned toward Evelyn, his expression filled not only with gratitude, but with deep respect. "You walked into uncertainty when everyone else walked away. Ashmoor still stands because you chose to follow the truth instead of the crowd." Around them, one by one, the people who had doubted her slowly lowered their heads, not in shame alone, but in sincere acknowledgement that the kingdom's greatest protector had never worn a crown. Morning arrived over Ashmoor wrapped in quiet golden light instead of fearful silence. The heavy clouds that had lingered above the kingdom for days had disappeared, allowing warm sunlight to spill across the castle walls, the distant mountains, and the endless forest that had watched over generations of kings. For the first time since the Harvest Moon Festival had begun, the bells rang freely once again. Their joyful sound drifted across the valley, carried by a gentle breeze that seemed to awaken every living thing. Birds returned to the royal gardens. The fountains shimmered beneath the early light. Even the towering pines surrounding Elderwood Forest appeared brighter, as though the land itself had taken a peaceful breath after a long season of waiting. Citizens gathered quietly in the castle courtyard, not because they had been summoned, but because they wished to witness the beginning of something new. King Lucian Blackwood stood before them wearing neither ceremonial armor nor the jeweled cloak reserved for great celebrations. Instead, he appeared as the guardian his people had always believed him to be, steady, humble, and grateful. Beside him stood Evelyn Carter, still dressed in the simple forest cloak she had worn throughout her journey. Nothing about her appearance had changed, yet everyone saw her differently now. They no longer looked upon an overlooked Omega who wandered among ancient trees. They saw the woman whose courage had protected both the kingdom and the truth when fear had nearly erased them both. The sacred stag stepped gracefully into the center of the courtyard, its radiant coat glowing beneath the morning sun. Without a single command, every conversation faded into respectful silence. The guardian slowly approached Evelyn and lowered its magnificent head. Then, with gentle purpose, one golden antler lightly touched the palm of her outstretched hand. A circle of soft silver light spread beneath her feet, flowing across the stone like calm water before extending toward the ancient forest beyond the castle walls. Every flower in the royal gardens bloomed at once. The old oak standing beside the courtyard released thousands of silver leaves that drifted through the air like quiet blessings. No one spoke. No one wished to interrupt a moment that felt older than memory itself. King Lucian watched the light with quiet admiration before turning toward the gathered people. "A kingdom is not preserved by strength alone," he said. "It endures because ordinary people choose honesty when deception is easier, kindness when suspicion feels safer, and courage when no reward is promised." His words settled gently across the crowd. Many lowered their eyes, remembering how quickly they had accepted fear instead of seeking the truth. Others smiled through grateful tears, understanding that forgiveness often required more strength than judgment. Lucian then faced Evelyn and offered a respectful bow, not as a king honoring a subject, but as one guardian recognizing another. "The forest chose wisely," he said. Evelyn smiled softly, humbled more than proud. She looked toward the sacred stag, whose peaceful eyes reflected the same quiet understanding she had first seen beside the hidden pond. She finally realized that destiny had never been about becoming someone greater than others. It had simply asked her to remain faithful to what was right when almost everyone else believed she was wrong. As the morning sun climbed higher above Ashmoor, the sacred stag turned and walked calmly toward Elderwood Forest, disappearing between the ancient pines without a single sound. Yet no one felt sadness watching it leave. They understood at last that true guardians were never meant to remain where everyone could always see them. They remained wherever truth, compassion, and quiet courage continued to guide those willing to follow their light. And from that day forward, whenever the bells welcomed another harvest moon, the people remembered that the greatest legends were not born from power or fear, but from one humble heart that refused to stop searching for the truth.